everyone, and welcome back to the Shivering Mouse Podcast. I am so excited to have you with me today, and if you look behind me, you'll see I've got my brand new set up from Thanksgiving break, so that was fun. I've got all of my Disney resort mugs up at the top, my special birthday note from Mickey right here. I'm trying to do that weatherman thing. It's actually taken a lot of concentration. Special signed autograph picture of the Fab Five for my husband right here. My bridal mouse ears. My classic Winnie the Pooh. And I've got some of my pins hanging out up here, and some bride and groom Christmas ornaments, and some classic fairy tales. And whew, now I can stop kind of concentrating on reverse imaging what I'm doing with my finger. But I just thought I'd give you the grand tour. Today we're going to go ahead and continue along with the next chapter of our Narnia series. This is chapter 4 of Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis, called The Dwarf Tells of Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian lived in a great castle in the center of Narnia with his uncle Miraz, the king of Narnia, and his aunt, who had red hair and was called Queen Prunaprismia. Okay, when you have prune in your name, you know you're just a delight, right? Alright, sorry, I'll turn off the commentary. His father and mother were dead, and the person whom Caspian loved best was his nurse, though, being a prince, he had wonderful toys which would do almost anything but talk. He liked best the last hour of the day when the toys had all been put back in their cupboards and the nurse would tell him stories. He did not much care for his uncle and aunt, but about twice a week his uncle would send for him, and they would walk up and down together for half an hour on the terrace on the south side of the castle. One day, while they were doing this, the king said to him, "Well, boy, we must soon teach you to ride and use a sword. You know that your aunt and I have no children, so it looks as though you might have to be king when I'm gone. How shall you like that, eh?" "I don't know, uncle," said Caspian. "Don't know, eh?" said Miraz. "Why, I should like to know what more anyone could wish for." "All the same, I do wish," said Caspian. "What do you wish?" asked the king. I wish I could have lived in the old days," said Caspian. He was only a very little boy at the time. Up until now, King Miraz had been talking in the tiresome way that some grown-ups have, which makes it quite clear that they're not really interested in what you're saying, but now he suddenly gave Caspian a very sharp look. "Eh? What's that?" he said. "What old days do you mean?" "Oh, don't you know, uncle," said Caspian, "when everything was quite different, when all the animals could talk, and there were nice people who lived in the streams and the trees, naiads and dryads they were called, and there were dwarves, and there were lovely little fawns in all the woods, and they had feet like goats, and—" "That's all nonsense for babies," said the king sternly. "Only fit for babies, do you hear? You're getting too old for that sort of stuff. At your age, you ought to be thinking of battles and adventures, not fairy tales." I'm 33, and I'm still almost always thinking of fairy tales. Guess I relate a little more to Caspian than Miraz in this one. "Oh, but there were battles and adventures in those days," said Caspian. "Wonderful adventures. Once there was a white witch, and she made herself queen of the whole country, and she made it so that it was always winter. And then 2 boys and 2 girls came from somewhere, and, oh, they killed the white witch, and they were made kings and queens of Narnia, and their names were Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy, and so they reigned forever, so long, and everyone had a lovely time, and it was all because of Aslan." "Who's he?" said Miraz. And if Caspian had been a little older, the tone of his uncle's voice would have warned him that it would be wiser to shut up. But he babbled on. "Oh, don't you know?" he said. "Aslan is the great lion who comes from over the sea." "Who has been telling you all this nonsense?" said the king in the voice of a thunderbolt. Caspian was frightened and said nothing. "Your Royal Highness," said King Miraz, letting go of Caspian's hand, which he had been holding until now, "I insist upon being answered. Look me in the face. Who has been telling you this pack of lies?" The nurse," faltered Caspian, and then he burst into tears. "Stop that noise," said his uncle, taking Caspian by the shoulders and giving him a shake. Stop it. Shock it. That doesn't even make sense. "Stop it, and never let me catch you talking or thinking either about all those silly stories again. There never were those kings and queens. How could there be 2 kings at the same time? And there is no such person as Aslan. There are no such things as lions. And there never was a time when animals could talk. Do you hear?" "Yes, uncle," sobbed Caspian. "Then let's have no more of it," said the king. Then he called to one of the gentlemen in waiting who was standing at the far end of the terrace and said in a cold voice, "Conduct His Royal Highness to his apartments and send for His Royal Highness's nurse to me at once." The next day Caspian found what a terrible thing he had done, for the nurse had been sent away without even being given a goodbye to him, and he was told that he was to have a tutor. Caspian missed his nurse very much and shed many tears, and because he was so miserable he thought about the old stories of Narnia far more than before. He dreamed of dwarves and dryads every night and tried very hard to make the dogs and cats in the castle talk to him, but the dogs only wagged their tails and the cats only purred. Caspian felt sure he would hate the new tutor, but when the tutor arrived about a week later, he turned out to be the sort of person it is almost impossible not to like. He was the smallest and also the fattest man that Caspian had ever seen. He had a long, silvery, pointed beard which came down to his waist, and his face, which was brown and covered with wrinkles, looked very wise, very ugly, and very kind. His voice was grave, and his eyes were merry, so that until you got to know him really well, it was hard to know when he was joking and when he was serious. His name was Dr. Cornelius. Of all of his lessons with Dr. Cornelius, the one that Caspian liked the best was history. Up until now, except for the nurse's stories, he had known nothing about the history of Narnia, and he was very surprised to learn that the royal family were newcomers to the country. "It was your Highness's ancestor, Caspian I," said Dr. Cornelius, who first conquered Narnia and made it his kingdom. "It was he who brought all of your nation to this country. You are not native Narnians at all. You are all Telmarines. That is, you came from the land of Telmar, far beyond the western mountains. That is why Caspian I is called Caspian the Conqueror." "Please, doctor," said Caspian one day, "who lived in Narnia before we all came out of Telmar?" "No men, or very few, lived in Narnia before the Telmarines took it," said Dr. Cornelius. "Then who did my great-great-grandsestors conquer?" "Whom, not who, your Highness," said Dr. Cornelius. "Perhaps it is time we moved from history to grammar." "Oh, please, not yet," said Caspian. "I mean, wasn't there a battle? Why is he called Caspian the Conqueror if there was nobody there to fight him?" "I said there were very few men in Narnia," said the doctor, looking at the little boy very strangely through his great spectacles. For a moment Caspian was puzzled, and then suddenly his heart gave a leap. "Do you mean," he gasped, "do you mean that there were other things? Do you mean that it was like the stories? Were there—" "Hush!" said Dr. Cornelius, laying his head very close to Caspian's. "Not a word more. Don't you know that your nurse was sent away for telling you about old Narnia? The king doesn't like it. If he found me telling you secrets, you'd be whipped and I should have my head cut off." "But why?" asked Caspian. "It is high time we turned to grammar now," said Dr. Cornelius in a loud voice. "Will your Royal Highness be pleased to open Pulvernitus Siccus at the 4th page of his Grammatical Garden, or the Arbor of Accidents, Pleasantile opened to Tenderwits." Goodness. After that, it was all nouns and verbs until lunchtime, but I don't think Caspian learned much. He was too excited. He felt sure that Dr. Cornelius would not have said so much unless he meant to tell him more sooner or later. In this he was not disappointed. A few days later his tutor said, "Tonight I am going to give you a lesson in astronomy. At the dead of night, 2 noble planets, Tarva and Alambil, will pass within 1 degree of each other. Such a junction has not occurred for 200 years, and your Highness will not live to see it again. It will be best if you go to bed a little earlier than usual. When the time of the conjunction draws near, I will come and wake you." This didn't seem to have anything to do with old Narnia, which was what Caspian really wanted to hear about, but getting up in the middle of the night is always interesting, and he was moderately pleased. When he went to bed that night, he thought at first that he would not be able to sleep, but soon dropped off, and it seemed only a few minutes before he felt someone gently shaking him. He sat up in bed and saw that the room was full of moonlight. Dr. Cornelius, muffled in a hooded robe, was holding a small lamp in his hand and stood by the bedside. Caspian remembered at once what they were going to do. He got up and put on some clothes. Although it was a summer night, he felt colder than he had expected, and was quite glad when the doctor wrapped him up in a robe like his own and gave him a pair of warm, soft slippers for his feet. A moment later, both muffled so they could hardly be seen in the dark corridors, and both shoed so that they made almost no noise, master and pupil left the room. Caspian followed the doctor through passages and up several staircases, and at last, through a little door in a turret, they came out upon the leads. On one side there were battlements, and on the other a steep roof. Below them all the shadowy, shimmery castle gardens, and above them the stars and moon. Presently they came to another door, which led into the great central tower of the whole castle. Dr. Cornelius unlocked it, and they began to climb the winding stair of the tower. Caspian was becoming excited. He had never been allowed up this stair before. It was long and steep, and when they came to the top of the roof of the tower, Caspian had got his breath, when he felt that it was well worth it. Way on his right he could see, rather indistinctly, the western mountains. On his left was the gleam of the great river, and everything was so quiet that he could hear the sound of the waterfall at Beaver's Dam a mile away. There was no difficulty in picking out the 2 stars they had come to see. They were hung rather low in the southern sky, and almost as bright as 2 little moons very close together. "Are they going to have a collision?" he asked in an awestruck voice. "Nay, dear prince," said the doctor, and he too spoke in a whisper. "The great lords of the upper sky know the steps of their dance too well for that. Look well upon them. Their meeting is fortunate, and it means some great good for the sad realm of Narnia. Tarva, the Lord of Victory, salutes Alambil, the Lady of Peace. They are just coming to their nearest." "It's a pity that tree gets in the way," said Caspian. "We'd really see better from the west tower, though it's not so high." Dr. Cornelius said nothing for about 2 minutes, but stood still, with his eyes fixed on Tara and Alambil. Then he drew a deep breath and turned to Caspian. "There," he said, "you have seen what no man now alive has seen, nor will see again. And you are right, we would have been able to see it even better from the smaller tower. But I brought you here for another reason." "Bailey, don't eat the firewood." "Thank you." Caspian looked up at him, but the doctor's hood concealed most of his face. "The virtue of this tower," said Dr. Cornelius, "is that we have 6 empty rooms beneath us and a long stair, and the door at the bottom of the stair is locked. We cannot be overheard." "Are you going to tell me what you wouldn't tell me the other day?" said Caspian. "I am," said the doctor, "but remember, you and I must never talk about these things except here, on the very top of the great tower." "No, that's a promise," said Caspian, "but do go on, please." "Listen," said the doctor. All you have heard about the old Narnia is true. It is not the land of men. It is the country of Aslan, the country of the walking trees, invisible naiads, of fauns and satyrs and dwarves and giants, of the gods and the centaurs and the talking beasts. It was against these that the first Caspian fought. It is you Telmarines who silenced the beasts and trees and the fountains, who killed and drove away the dwarves and the fauns, are now trying to cover up even the memory of them. The king does not allow them to be spoken of." "Oh, I do wish we hadn't," said Caspian, "but I am glad it was all true, even if it's all over." "Many of your race wish that in secret," said Dr. Cornelius. "But, doctor," said Caspian, "why do you say my race? After all, I suppose you are a Telmarin too." "Am I?" said the doctor. "Well, you're a man, anyway," said Caspian. "Am I?" repeated the doctor in a deeper voice, at the same moment throwing back his hood so that Caspian could see his face clearly in the moonlight. All at once Caspian realized the truth, and felt that he ought to have realized it before. Dr. Cornelius was so small and so fat, and had such a very long beard. 2 thoughts came into his head at the same time. One was the thought of terror. He's not a real man, not a man at all. He's a dwarf, and he brought me up here to kill me. The other was of sheer delight. There really are still dwarves, and I've seen one. "So, you've guessed it in the end," said Dr. Cornelius, "or guessed it nearly right. I'm not a pure dwarf. I have human blood in me also. Many dwarves escaped the great battles and lived on, shaving their beards and wearing high-heeled boots and pretending to be men. They have mixed with your Telmarines. I am one of those, only a half-dwarf, and if any of my kindred, the true dwarves, are still alive anywhere in the world, doubtless they would despise me and call me a traitor. But never in all these years have we forgotten our own people and all the other happy creatures of Narnia, and the long-lost days of freedom." I'm sorry, doctor," said Caspian. "It wasn't my fault, you know." "I'm not saying these things to blame you, dear prince," answered the doctor. "You may well ask why I say them at all, but I have 2 reasons. Firstly, because my old heart has carried these secret memories so long that it aches with them, and would burst if I did not whisper them to you. But secondly for this, when you become king, you may help us. For I know that you also, Telmarine though you are, love the old things. I do, said Caspian, but how can I help? You can be kind to the poor remnants of the dwarf people like myself. You can gather learned magicians and try to find a way of awakening the trees once more. You can search through all the nooks and wild places of the land to see if any of the fauns or wild beasts or dwarves are perhaps still alive and in hiding. Do you think there are any? Asked Caspian eagerly. I don't know, said the doctor with a deep sigh. Sometimes I'm afraid there can't be. I've been looking for traces of them all my life, and sometimes I've thought I've heard a dwarf drum in the mountains. Sometimes at night in the woods I thought I had caught a glimpse of fauns and satyrs dancing a long way off. But then I came to a place and there was nothing there. I have often despaired, but something always happens to start me hoping again. I don't know, but at least you can try to be a king like the High King Peter of old, and not like your uncle. Then it's true about the kings and queens, too, and about the White Witch? Said Caspian. Certainly it's true, said Cornelius. Their reign was the golden age of Narnia, and the land has never forgotten them. And did they live in this castle, Doctor? No, my dear, said the old man. This castle is a thing of yesterday. Your great-great-grandfather built it. But when the 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve were made kings and queens of Narnia by Aslan himself, they lived in the castle of Cair Paravel. No man alive has seen that blessed place, and perhaps the ruins of it have now vanished. But we believe it was far from here, down at the mouth of the great river, on the very shore of the sea. Ah, said Caspian with a shudder. Do you mean in the Black Woods, where all the ghosts live? Your Highness speaks as you have been taught, said the doctor, but it is all lies. There are no ghosts down there. That is the story invented by the Telmarines. Your kings are in deadly fear of the sea because they can never quite forget all the stories where Aslan comes from over the sea. They don't want to go near it, and they don't want anyone else to go near it. So they have let the great woods grow up to cut their people off from the coast. But because they have quarreled with the trees, they are afraid of the woods, and because they're afraid of the woods, they imagine that they're full of ghosts. And the kings and great men, hating both the sea and the wood, partly believe these stories and partly encourage them. They feel safer if no one in Narnia dares to go down to the coast and look out to the sea, towards Aslan's land and the morning and the eastern end of the world. There was a deep silence between them for a few minutes, and then Dr. Cornelius said, Come, we've been up here long enough. It's time to go down to bed. Must we? Said Caspian. I'd like to go on talking about these things for hours and hours and hours. Someone might begin looking for us if we did that, said Dr. Cornelius. Chapter 5 is for next week, and that's Caspian's Adventure in the Mountains. Now, since it is the first podcast for the new month, I need to go ahead and draw a name for this month's gift. So let me see. Mix them up here. Alright, this month's prize goes to Tom and Amanda Scott, so I will go ahead and put the package together and send a gift to you guys. I'll probably shoot you a message just to make sure I have your correct address, because I'm not sure my husband has it correctly. I'll just double check on that so that your gift gets to the right place, and you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for tuning in.